on indigenous peoples who are working in alliance and common cause with indigenous peoples to examine the truth about the past and to come to a process of healing and a process of education. Oftentimes, people do not realize that there's a learning curve involved with coming into contact with indigenous peoples, particularly traditional people such as Chief Warren Lyons and my good friend and colleague Virgil Kilstraight, a ceremonial person in the Oglala Lakota Nation, and so many others, Chief Jake Swamp and so forth. These traditional knowledge keepers, the Aboriginal elders here in Australia, who have maintained the language and the traditions and the ceremonial rituals as much as they possibly could, as much as humanly possible, given the onslaught against our nations and peoples for many centuries. And so I congratulate them for their efforts, Phil and Mary, and also acknowledge those traditional elders of this land, the ancestral owners of this land, and the spirits of this place and the Wurundjeri Nation, Wurundjeri people. With regard to the doctrine of Christian discovery, there's so much to say about that because it really isn't just discovery. This is just a title that we put on there to make it kind of a good starting point. But really, it's really about domination and dominion. So I usually say the doctrine of Christian discovery and dominion, or the Christian discovery, doctrine, and domination. And I want to mention that it is a wonderful thing that the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples has been adopted by the vast majority of the members of the United Nations system. But I want to say that that's only a starting point to a much, much longer process. Because if you have Vatican documents that initiated this trajectory that we're talking about today, that were issued in, for example, 1344 and 1436 and 1452 and 1455 and 1456 and 1481 and 4 in 1493 and 1 in 1506 and 1 in 1514, that actually continued and replicated this pattern of domination that went all over the world to such a destructive extent, resulting in so many deaths of so many peoples, annihilation of entire peoples that are no longer existing, languages that are no longer existing. This is an institutionalization in law and policy of a very pernicious and ecologically destructive way of thinking and way of behaving. And so now we come to the point of a paradigm crisis on this planet, on this beautiful Mother Earth, where we have to come to terms with that path that's been taking us the wrong direction. And the word crisis is crossroads. So now we have the opportunity to decide we're going to continue to go that way on the path of destruction and domination and empire and greed, or are we going to turn a different direction? But if we're going to turn a different direction, we need models. We need patterns. We need examples of what that other direction would entail. Right here in this continent, you have at least 60,000 years of spiritual and cultural and ceremonial evolution. How much myelin in the brain does that represent? How much neurological development does that represent? One of the oldest cultures in existence on this planet. And how much respect and honoring is given to that culture and to those original carriers of that knowledge tradition, that Dreamtime tradition in this land. Why is it so disregarded and disrespected and ignored? Because of the doctrine of terra nullius. Now, Mary mentioned the doctrine of terra nullius. That's a Roman law term. It has to do with enemies, or it has to do with vacant lands. Nobody lives there. So you find it, you go ahead and start living there. But an enemy is declared null and void in Roman law. So that's part of that. But nullus is a different thing. Nullus has a specific meaning. Terra nullius is a land inhabited by heathens, pagans, infidels, or unbaptized persons. who are therefore declared null and void. So 60,000 years of spiritual and ceremonial and cultural evolution can be completely voided, conceptually, culturally, institutionally, legally, because the ancestors of those people were not Christians when the Christian Europeans arrived. Now that is the legacy that has to be dealt with in terms of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Let me read you very briefly from some definitions from the Webster's New International Dictionary of the English Language in 1950, which actually comes from earlier dictionaries in 1890 and 1900. Family of nations. The aggregate of states, in parentheses, originally the Christian nations of Europe, which, as a result of their historical antecedents, have inherited a common civilization and are at a similar level of moral and political opinion, or have been recognized by those states as on that level. So what that really is saying is that this is a group of Christian nations, but the historical antecedents include the papal bulls. Where did I find the papal bulls? It's in a book. The title page to the book. European Treaties bearing on the history of the United States and its dependencies. Now, why in the world are all these Vatican papal bulls in a book about European treaties? Because they form the backdrop of the entire international law system that has been used in such a disrespectful and destructive manner against indigenous nations and peoples throughout the world.